welcome everybody, and welcome to John and Paul. And we delighted that they've rejoined us after our last BME Café, which was probably about a year ago. Seems like last week. So we've got a list of questions which I hope that Catherine is going to put up on the screen. So we asked the network to come up with some questions because we thought that it's only fair that we give you time to think about some of them. But like we did last time, some of them might just come up organically. But to be fair, we've got quite a few to get through. So I think there's about 13. So do you just want me to kick off with the first one? And I don't know if Paul and John, you want to decide amongst yourselves which one you want to take or which order. I know sometimes you mix it up about who goes first.
If you want to kick off, and I'll just frame it a bit, and then I think between us we'll just try and feed in as best we can with the answers, if that's okay.
Yeah, so you've got them on the screen, but I'll just read them out as we go along. So question number 1. It has now been over a year since the death of George Floyd. In your opinion, what has the Trust done in response to tackling racism within our organisation?
Great. I think the first thing I just wanted to say was, first off, thank you for the opportunity to meet with you again, and also really appreciated getting the questions and having a bit of time to reflect on them. And you know, I found it actually a really powerful prompt. And one of the things that it's left me reflecting on is that actually it enabled us to collate a lot of activity, and I think that one of our weaknesses has been is that we've not actually been doing that very well, that actual collation. So you know, I think there's actually quite a lot that we can talk about. Obviously, big start point is that this is still early days for us in terms of our renewed energy that we certainly were expressing a year or so ago, and there is absolutely no complacency from our position. But I think there's quite a few bits and pieces that we could reflect on, and some of them hook back into later questions as well as we go through, Angela. But as a start point, I just wanted to say that it actually has been a really helpful prompt certainly for me to be able to reflect with John, to reflect with some non-executive colleagues as well, and to really just concentrate on drawing together some pieces of activity. So John, I don't know if you want to say anything and start getting into some of the specific pieces.
Thanks, Paul. Afternoon, everybody, and likewise, thanks for the opportunity for joining you and giving us some sight of the questions. And I'll start to sort of feed in some specifics, Angela, about in relation to question 1. But just to sort of round off Paul's comments, really, which I'd agree with. I think the other thing that I'd like to say at the outset, that as we continue to have this conversation, don't want in any way to come across as being defensive from either a chief executive or an executive board position. I'm aware that we've still got a massive amount to do. I'm also aware that that there are probably some quite significant gaps, particularly from your perspectives about what you think we need to be doing more of and focusing on. And I know you are never backwards at coming forwards, but please continue to everybody to encourage speaking up and giving us the feedback, because we need that to help prompt us, guide us, steer us, in terms of we can't all do everything at once, but what about this, what about that, look at this, because it's a really important energy source for us in terms of where we need to go and what we need to prioritise. So that's by way of my sort of introductory piece. And then just some specifics in terms of what we've done. So I'd like to think that broadly across the organisation, we've got a much more visible conversation going on collectively about issues of racism, harassment, inequality than we had previously. Certainly, I'm having much more regular conversations. I'm getting more inputs, whether it's emails or messages about people's experiences. By the nature of my role, there's still predominantly poorer experience and better experiences, but I am getting now and again some people feeding back saying this was an issue, it's better, thank you, but I'm by no means complacent at all. It's just particularly we're all been very focused on the pandemic and the vaccines. I think I'd like to think that we served our people well in terms of our response across doing risk assessments, and that we were clear that we prioritised the most vulnerable members of our staff groups, which would obviously include people from BME backgrounds, and that we, from an organisational perspective, help support all those individuals make an informed decision as possible with regard to accessing the vaccine. We had some great conversations, and hopefully we're able to allay some people's fears, and that every additional member of staff that gets the vaccine, is a real step forward for not just them, but their families and people that they come into contact with. There's a number of things that I could talk about, but just in terms of perhaps a more conversational piece, of just pull out a couple of particular things. So the appointment of equality diversity leads in forensics division and in mental health and learning disability divisions, I think it is hopefully seen as not just a powerful statement, but a mechanism by which we can really start to focus on some of the doing. In terms of this is all very well and good, John, in terms of rhetoric, but so what? I think those roles can be really powerful within our divisions to help drive that throughout the organisation. So it's not just seen as the executive or the board office saying this sort of stuff. The other point, perhaps before I hand back to you, Angela, to start us off, would be around being much more aware of making sure that on our interview panels we've got representation from BME groups to again help inform our appointments process, which is very much value based, and to inform those conversations and that selection process to make sure that we get to get the right questions asked, really, in terms of not just ticking the box in terms of representative numbers, but to make sure that when we're interviewing people that we have that conversation with regard to experiences of BME people in the organisation. So that's sort of my kick-off to start with. Angela looks like she's on the phone. Paul, I don't know whether you want
just a couple of bits if I can add in. And I think the last time we had a conversation together like this, a part of what some of you asked was about actually the personal piece, and I think it may be helpful if we just share some of the things personally that we've done. So certainly we were proactive around things like having the couple of pod chats on exploring racism and the experience of some of our staff. I think there've been a couple of times now where John and I have written to staff. We don't often write to large swathes of staff. We chose to write during this last year. And I think that George Floyd murder as framing the year, I found quite a helpful piece, because I think that was a really important point for many of us, certainly for me, about actually saying we have to step up to do more. So John and I, we'd written jointly to all our BME staff relatively early in that year. More recently, we've actually we wrote to staff from the European Union, wanting to send out some reassurance about how valued they are, and also to offer help around people going through the various registering processes that they are being expected to go through, and really wanting to present that in a very, very positive light, understanding that may be causing some worries for some of our staff. There's lots of other stuff, Angela, that fits in with later questions around things like, there's some key questions on things like training, some of the stuff about what the board actually led on, and I think we can come back to those. There's also work that's been done around hate crime and hate incidents, and we've sought to have conversations at board level around that as well, so that we're really making sure there is now a 6-monthly report that comes to the board. So that's also important, not only for us as a board to have the conversation, but to be doing so in public, which I think is a really important piece of the picture. And there's a few other bits that I'll pick up again when we get onto some of the later questions. But are you happy to move on to the next one, Angela? We'll just keep on doing a bit of a double act if we can.
Yeah, and me and Robert have decided to alternate, so we're going to do a double act as well.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I suppose this fits me quite well, actually, because I'm all into measurements and improvements. So how is the trust going to measure improvements regarding race equality, and who will be held accountable?
Do you want to start on that one, John?
Yeah, sorry, I was just my fastest finger first didn't work. I wouldn't do very well on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Yeah, so great question. So one of it's interesting, Robert, you started on that, in terms of your background around figures and things. One of the things that I am aware of and also slightly embarrassed about is our RES data, so the Workforce Equality Standard. And first of all, this, as you all know, this data has been collected for a long time, but at a board level, we're not having regular conversations about what it is and what it means and what we're doing about it. It comes in a big long list of performance measures, and we make a note, or someone might make a comment, and just the culture we have around that is just, in my view, not strong enough in terms of, it's all very well, but so what? This is really important data that is seen just as part of lots of other. So again, so culture and value perspective, it's critical, and it's, I put my hand up, it's me. I'm ultimately accountable for this. That we have a properly informed conversation about, okay, so we've got to know it, but we've also got to do something about it. So we've got a race equality improvement plan that we developed in partnership with the Race, Religion and Belief Equality Steering Group, just tangentially. Could we call that something else that's got a bit more of a catchy title at some point? But and that action plan will be monitored through the People Committee, which is one of the committees of the board. So that will be chaired by a non-executive director with the relevant executive lead, which in this case will be Claire, team independent team. And the purpose of those board committees are really to do some of the detail around making sure from a governance and oversight perspective that we're doing the things that we should be doing. And I think from perhaps the opposite end of that spectrum is being able to have regular meetings that are a little bit more informal with the BME network people like yourselves to get a much more sort of live perspective and lens on how we're doing. So, and that, you know, if we do things well, we can amalgamate the two. So, for example, the numbers may look good, but people's experiences are no different, or even vice versa. And we've got to get much more able and agile to address that. Paul?
Yeah, couple of specifics. I think one of the things for me, Robert, is that a lot of this isn't about us finding new data. It's about using data that we've already got, but we haven't been making good, useful interrogation of. So actually, so for example, data on reported racist incidents. I think we can make better use of that to actually then inform some of what my non-executive directors we talk about quite a lot of about is triangulation of different data. So if we're hearing about a part of the organisation which isn't performing as well as we would expect in terms of services for patients, are we hearing other things such as actually, well, where are the incidents of racism that we're hearing about? Where is the stuff that our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian is coming to John and myself and saying, actually, you need to be alert to this? And actually making better use of our data and triangulating that. I think another example of that is about also feeding that into the board committee structure. And just to say a little bit more on the People Committee, John's gone for another shorter version of the title, but the full title is really important. It's the People, Culture and Inclusion Committee. And that is something that we established. That's one of the things that we've established from the board in the last year. So previously, going back to when I joined the trust back at the beginning of 2020, we'd had a people focused committee and we'd had a quality committee, and we chose for a while to bring the two together. And there was a strong rationale for that. But actually, during the year, we did some reflecting and just felt that we were not doing sufficient, that by bringing all of that together, we were risking not focusing enough attention on enough of the areas that we needed to cover. And rather than just separating them out back then to people and quality, we thought there was a really important message for us to be saying, well, what do we want to do through the People Committee? It's more than, if I can say it as just kind of HR stuff. Actually, this is people in its broadest sense. And by including inclusion explicitly in the title of that, it enables my non-exec colleagues who are on that committee to know that they should be expecting and demanding strong focus around inclusion work and getting that data coming through. But again, not just the data, but the analysis of what is it telling us, and more importantly, what then are we going to do about that? And that committee reports direct to the board. And it can report in different ways. So it reports through on, here's the stuff that we're doing. What it also does, it's got the ability to escalate things to the board. And that could be for a positive reason, because it wants something highlighted in that public domain. However, it's also a point where the committee can say, you know what, this isn't moving fast enough, or we're not seeing an impact here. We need to have escalate it to the full board for a discussion. And then the one other piece of data that I think we're starting to do more on now is from the staff survey, the free text data. And we've now had a first proper go analysis of that data, and that includes being able to go through, I mean, it is hundreds of sentences, but they are really rich, and doing some proper analysis of the words used means that we're able to pull out from that themes. And again, that will be coming through that key committee and to the board for us to say, okay, we may have the headline numbers on the staff survey, some of which, as John said, are not as good as we need them to be, particularly around the experience of BME staff. But that free text data tells us people's real experience, and it's really important that we use that to then say, okay, what's the theme underneath the high level numbers? So I think those are some of the things that I think we're starting. You know, we're in a place now where we've got better markers, and by having the connectivity to the public board, it means that our accountability is in the public domain as well, and it doesn't sit solely, whilst it's really helpful having our us having our connectivity to yourselves. You know, it's not solely sitting on your shoulders. It's actually about us taking this into the public domain. So that's all I'd say on that one, Robert. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's really, thank you for that response. I think that's a really good response. I think the themed work around the staff survey is something that we look forward to. I think that's going to be a really good piece of work. Bobinda, you've got your hand up. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I just want just a couple of comments and then just clarify something. So one is, yes, as co-chair along with Robert of the Race Relations Police Equality Steering Group, I think I agree with John on the title change, but all suggestions welcome. So the action plan that's been developed by the group, and some people have had sight of it. I think it's something that's really quite important just to pick up on. I think John's point is that the action plan has been developed. It's been developed, you know, in that group, and we've been working very hard on getting it through the sort of processing of other aspects of the trust, understanding it and recognising it. And we've just been through a committee sort of stage that sort of has agreed that it's something that can go forward to the board. But I think the broader point is, in terms of data and action, I think this is the thing that I just wanted to just comment on. I think what I'm hearing from a lot of colleagues is that it's just talk, it's words, you know, and we have lots and lots of research about racism. Mm-hmm. You know, we have lots of data about racism, the experience of race and racism. The collation of data, I think, is always useful in terms of informing action. I think that's true. But I think the time for action has sort of was about 10 years ago, to be honest, in my head. We really need to be moving in a much more progressive way to act, to make the changes and lay the foundations for creating the type of trust that we're talking about. Because I think in that action plan, there's a foundational stuff that we could do. But I do think, John, for me, and to speak from a personal point of view, it does really feel like we need to act in a much more positive way and work towards making a change, because my fear is that the systems, as all systems do, will be resistant to change. And I think that's my fear, is that the energy that we have now, and I think you've spoken to the energy, will just dissipate. And I'm hearing that from colleagues that, you know, there was a lot of energy, a lot of commitment. And the fear is, as systems do, they resist, they find ways of slowing things down, and we could end up in a very tricky situation in a year where most of the BME staff just disengage from the process. And I just wanted to express that. That's okay, Robert.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Bobinda. Yes, I think momentum is really important. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to pass back over to Angela.
Right. Oh, I get the long questions, do I? Do you think it is appropriate that senior and executive managers are invited to the BME Staff Network forums as part of an engagement process? to assist in gaining further understanding of the issues faced by BME staff across the organisation? If so, when can this start?
I'm
I can give a very short answer: yes, and now.
And I'd concur with that and say that although having said that, I think it's also for yourselves as the network to decide on that. What I have seen work effectively elsewhere is splitting time, so that allies and others can join part of the meeting, but there's still dedicated space to the members, if that makes sense. But I'd certainly be very up for that, and I know colleagues would be. I think there's some real value from that. I think the practical ways of doing it, I'm sure Robert, Angela and others, you'd just be able to work through, so that what I wouldn't want to happen is for people like myself coming along actually meaning that it curtails some of the conversation that you have developed in yourselves as a network. But the principle of doing it, I would be really up for supporting it if it's something that the network felt up for opening up to.
Could I just ask roughly how many members you've got now compared to, I don't know, a year, 18 months ago, roughly? You know.
Catherine will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we were meeting face to face post pandemic, it was probably about around 150. Post pandemic, it went to about 262. So within the space of 12 months now, I don't know whether that has been aided as well by going virtual because of our geography. So when we used to meet face to face, we were say like 4 meetings a year, every couple of months. But we were getting to the stage pre-pandemic where we were going to open up one of the meetings to allies to attend, rather than just waiting for the annual Black History Conference. So we were at that stage, but then the pandemic sort of hit and we went on to monthly virtual because people were wanting, focus was more on support.
Yeah.
But we've always had a model of inviting speakers, engagement, relevant topics. But we've just more got back into that because the focus in those first initial months was on support and around the risk assessments and all the impact of COVID on the BME community.
I mean, it's impressive numbers, isn't it? And I think I've probably mentioned this before. I'd be really encouraging you and supporting you to find the right mechanism that feels right for you to enable allies to contribute. Because I think that could be one of the things that might even sound a bit paradoxical, but could really help power this up. In terms of what Bulbinder and others are saying about really need to want to make this movement move forward, and if it's, for example, a part of a meeting or a certain frequency, because I think and shout me down if I'm wrong, but I sense that organisationally we feel a bit more confident, at least, about having the conversation now, and I think people feel able that. To say I don't know, to ask for help and support, to ask others for their experience inputs to help them in their sort of thinking through and position. So if that's something that helps us progress things quicker, faster, further, whatever I or others can do to support that endeavour for you, then let us know. And equally, if you don't think it's right, say. Do
you move on to the next question? Is that?
Yeah, Robert, you're on.
Okay, so this is a long question. So it's clear from the BME staff that no proactive action other than those developed or instigated by the BME network has been forthcoming. So as far as you understand, has any initiative or in relation to race been instigated, developed by board members, senior managers, or any other staff member outside the BME network?
Yeah, and I thought it was a really interesting question, and I was listening to myself on how I reacted to it as well. And that goes back to what I said right at the start about, I think on reflection, we haven't done as much as we should be doing to actually communicate some of the sorts of conversations and actions that we have been taking. I do think I think the network is incredibly important, and I don't deny at all that it's really important in terms of you driving stuff, and I really welcome that as well, because I like John was just saying there, you know, I want to be able to hear from our staff when things aren't right and there's things that we should be doing differently. I think on top of that, there are some things I'd feed in that I think we have done, and some sort of quite specific ones. And I know I'm a bit of a kind of a governance nerd when it comes to like kind of goes with the territory a bit. But one of the things was in this last year we had an opportunity to reflect on the lack of diversity around the board table. And I think I talked about this actually at the session a year ago and said that I thought there was an opportunity for us to go out to some recruitment and to be really clear and hope to improve our diversity. And we have been successful in that, but there are a couple of bits that didn't happen by accident. So first off was actually I led a piece of work to redesign the non-executive role description, the job description that goes with it. And for us to really make clear the importance for us of having people who'd got experience at senior level of influencing organizations to tackle racism. So it wasn't about saying them as individuals doing that. It was about them and having the skills to influence. And we also were able to work through a lot of networks. Catherine, I have to say, was particularly helpful on this, where she was able to make sure that a whole range of BME networks were targeted with information about this piece of recruitment and for non-executives. And I had, I think it was 11 phone calls prior to the closing date, all from BME people who were asking about this post because they'd had it prompted to them through their networks, which was a different way for us working. What we ended up with, as colleagues might be aware, is that we ended up, and it's the first time I've heard this in a trust that I've had any connections with, we ended up with a short list of 6 candidates, all of whom were BME. And we got to the point where, as the panels, I'm smiling because I can see Angela still on my screen. We basically had two prospective non-exec directors, both of whom we thought were really, really good, and we just couldn't split between them. And what we then did from the board perspective was, and again, this sounds a bit nerdy, but it's really important. We changed our constitution to enable us to increase the number of non-exec directors so we could take both Umar and Manjit. And that's been that's a really sort of positive thing in itself. It doesn't have a direct impact on the experiences of racism of our staff. But what it does do is enable us to start shifting some of our culture within the board and within our senior leadership. So that's something that I was particularly keen on. And I think John and I, John may say something about this. We've also been looking at our opportunities outside of the organisation. So within the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire system, John made sure that he put his hand up to be the senior responsible officer around the inclusion work. And that meant that we were taking some of our experiences and aspirations into that work. I've been involved in some national work with Lord Victor Adebowale, who was on a call with us at the Black History Month session, where he kindly did a conversation with me at that. I've subsequently done some work with him, again, around trying to bring some influence to bear for an organisation that he's involved with to affect change around how data drives tackling health inequalities. So those just some of the pieces. The one other, and again, this might sound really governance-y, but is important. At the last board meeting, our board and committee papers have been changed. The cover sheets for the papers now put a much more direct and explicit emphasis on show us where this this paper and all the actions, etc., that are in on this have an impact around inequalities, and also about assessment of if there's inequalities in the paper. And it's a much stronger piece in there, which I think enables us as a board to be then interrogating the paper more explicitly through a lens of, is this actually contributing to tackling racism in the organisation? So those just a few bits that I wanted to mention, Robert. I can see there's a hand up as well, but John might also have something else to add.
Well, it's Manjit who's got her hand up, so I'm going to defer to Manjit first.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I feel compelled to. I think that in my time as a non-exec, I've been sitting back and watching how the organisation operates, and it always takes me about six to 9 months to get a feel for and find my place in an organisation. Having done that, I think that the response to your question, I think, is that we have been over reliant on the network. If I, this is just my perception, Paul. So I think that we have been over reliant on the network to A, profile the issues, and B, have some answers. I think that there is work to do, and after our conversation yesterday, Paul, I went back to our website to look at what is the visibility on zero tolerance of racism on our website. What does it look like? What does it tell us? What are our what's our equality strategy and our core priorities for the year? How visible is it to our staff and our patients and the public? And what is our response to the people plan and its visibility for us as an organisation? So I think that there is corporately a lot of work for us to do, and for me in my role as Ned and working with Sue and Umar in the people committee, really driving some of that. So the work plan that you talked about, Balbinder, I want to see that at the people committee, and I want to see us driving and challenging the pace at which that gets implemented. And I think that the decision to separate people and quality committees is a brilliant one, and I think that actually it gives us the space to actually have the conversations about where we're going with this agenda in a way that we haven't been able to in the past. So I think that there is some significant challenge that we need to manage at the people committee on this, and I'll certainly be talking to Sue and Umar about how we do that.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is why when Manjit applied for the role of Ned, that we bit her hand off.
Okay, thank you, Manjit. That's really helpful for that reflection. Sorry, John, over to you.
I was going to thanks for that input, Manjit. I agree that, and it's really helpful to get that steer. I was going to add just a couple of other points on that one. The first was around to mention the parallel learning partnership scheme, which was launched in April. Just to give you a bit of feedback from the exec team perspective, and we've all got our parallel learning partners now, and everybody is just delighted to be involved in it. The feedback from our perspective is that already it's bearing fruit in terms of making those connections, starting to get to know our peers, and beginning to get some really different perspective and experience of the organisation from that perspective. It's relatively early days. I'd really like us to be able to roll that. Well, I know we are, but to continue to really profile that and roll it out, because again, I think that can be really powerful for us to help inform. And then I'll hand back to you in a sec, just to pick up the comments from Bulbinder and Andrew in the chat around the sort of environment within the organisation and helping move things on. I suppose that thinking about it, it reflects what Manjit's just said as well, that perhaps there's been a bit of an over-reliance too on senior leaders, Paul, myself, and that making sure that we've got within the action plan and to-do list that the tapping into line managers and into the roots across the whole organisation, because that in terms of that's where a lot of the interaction takes place, and we need to make sure that our people, and particularly our new managers being appointed, get the skills and confidence and the support to back up some of the the tough decisions and difficult calls they have to make on a daily basis. And again, I think that's something else that could really add value to what we're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Back to you, Angela, because you've got your hand up.
Oh, yeah. So I think it was just a couple of comments. So the first goes back to the recruitment, and from a personal note, I think myself and Robert have been quite critical about recruitment, and sometimes that you on there as the expert recruiter, and you're there along with other groups as with the values-based recruitment. And for the first time in that in being involved in the recruitment for the NEDs, I felt listened to, and my opinion was valued, and I could see the difference. And I was delighted that even more pleased when we changed the governance, because you couldn't call, you just knew that you wanted them both in the organisation. In terms of the line managers, I put that comment because in probably the recent weeks, months, most of the time that myself and Robert and Catherine get contacted around issues with staff, which we'll probably get onto that on a later question, is a lot of it is around issues to do with the immediate line managers. And so I think a lot of focus has been on the board, on the senior leaders, but it's always the ones that we get to know of. It's either colleagues or immediate line managers. So it's how that is getting out. And it's like you said, new managers, how we train our managers, or even ones that have been around for ages, how within some of our leadership programs we actually upskill people or give them the confidence to manage diverse teams across all protected characteristics, but obviously within this context, in the context of racism or black staff. That's all I just wanted to say.
Right. Do you want to move us on to the next question, Angela? So I think it'd be really good if we can get through all of the ones that were submitted.
So aside from lead individuals having been appointed in 2 of the clinical divisions, have any other substantial resources or financial commitments been allocated to actively address issues raised by BME staff around racism and ethnic inequalities?
Do you want to take that one, John, as it's more on the operational side?
Sorry, yeah. Again, great question. And sort of follow on from one of Paul's sort of thoughts earlier, that when you get asked this question, my immediate thought was, oh my goodness, that's a really good question. I don't know. Have we? Which I suppose on the one hand confirms one of our areas of weakness around communicating the good stuff that we are doing. But you know, what a great challenge in terms of so what have you done? So without getting too listy, you know, we've got the Associate Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion supporting the network. We have got executive champions for a number of staff networks, including this one. But just to say that more broadly, we had a conversation at the executive the other day that we don't think we've quite got that right across all the different protected characteristic groups. And that in terms of it's all very well having a sponsor name against each one, but we also don't have clarity about what that means and what the inputs and what the outputs of that are. So again, that's a piece of work for us to refresh that offer really, and obviously we'll include this network, and we value your sorts of thoughts about how we could improve that. And again, without repeating the things that we've already discussed, for example, the multimedia and communication support to the network to support your events and information. Again, I think there's more that we can do for that. There is something hot off the press. We found out the other day that within the Midlands region, there's going to be an opportunity for specific leadership development. I think for Band 6 to Linda's nodding. I'm sure she'll know the detail better than I on this. Is it Band 6 to 8A for the BME leadership development, Linda?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I think this is a tremendous opportunity to make sure that we avail ourselves of that and actually become sort of proactive about it, rather than perhaps ordinarily waiting to see who might be interested. I think we really need to go out and canvass and encourage, and we will commit to support people that want to get onto that programme. There's a few things to start us off, Paul.
Katrina put a question in about saying, is that the Mary Seacole course? I don't know if you can add any detail on.
Yes, it is.
I don't know if Linda, could you feed in on it?
Yeah, I was, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, colleagues. I was sitting back listening, and I just wanted to jump into this particular question. So there is the Mary Seacole program that has been running for years, but for the first time in the Midlands, there's been an aspiring leaders program set up for ethnic minority staff. So that's to develop band 6s right up to band 8 staff that we have across. So the onboarding, the first session, their welcome session was held last week, and that really has been well received. There's also an acknowledgement that this is the first time we're doing it, so we'll be learning together. So there were applications invited from across our Midland system. So several people have joined onto that. So that's the course that's being done. Aside from that, the group are still meeting to look at other things that can be put in place across the region to support ethnic minority staff. So some of us who are here are actually part of that working group and will be able to feed back more information. I just wanted to say, with regards to the things that are being done in the organization, some of them will not always be visible to everyone, depending on the area that you're working. But certainly in the last few months, I think colleagues will agree, there's been more listening events that have been put on across the organization in the different divisions, just to listen to staff. They're not specific to ethnic minority staff, but are actually very inclusive, so everyone is welcome to speak up. There's also been an increased visibility of senior leaders. So I'm going out to a lot of areas. I've had colleagues come and speak to me, and I think that's also been really well received. The one other thing that's been really, really good in the organization is that we're not being defensive about these issues. We're actually talking about them. So when we start saying what other resource has been put in place, so we've got people like Annette Magore, who's been leading on some of the work around hate crime and actually going out to support the different areas, particularly in the forensic division. So that's a resource that the organization is using because that's not Annette's day job. So she's supporting that work. I think recognizing that some of us, like myself, I am mentoring some junior ethnic minority staff in the organization. I joined in December. I've immediately picked that up. I can't mentor everyone, but there's a few people I've not been able to mentor, but I've actually got the mentors from other BME colleagues. So that's some of the things that I'm doing. And I welcome people who also say, well, actually, I'd welcome a mentor. That's something that will be able to support. So as I said, there's quite a lot that's happening. And like John said, some of it could be about how we communicate that more to colleagues. I know I haven't been able to attend a lot of the events that have been put on so far, but certainly when we have other meetings, I'll be able to update what's happening so that people can find out. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. It's really good to be hearing from you as well. And just to respond to Alexia's question there, saying, is there anything for AHPs? I think one of the things by having these kinds of programs, one of the things it can help us do is to say, where else should we be targeting our developmental resources? So I don't know if there is at the moment, Alexia, but it's a good one to be prodding at. Manjit, are you able to give an answer on that?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't at regional level at the moment, but my challenge back to the organisation would be we shouldn't be relying on a regional programme. So, and I think we've probably got one person from, I mean, each system had 2 places. So I don't know who's been nominated from the NOT system for the programme. But I think in response to that programme, we need to be as an organisation saying, so how do we develop a course, a development programme in-house that nurtures and supports our potential leaders for the future, wherever they come from. And it's that is kind of, going back to our strategy and priorities as an organisation. That's where we need to be focused.
Thanks. And the one last bit I was going to say about the resourcing conversation was that Manjit mentioned that she and myself and Sue Nixon and Umar as well, we were meeting yesterday just to have a conversation about, as the non-execs on the People, Culture and Inclusion Committee, how can they do the appropriate driving of our inclusion agendas. And one of the explicit pieces we had was that I was saying to them that I wanted them to be able to send a strong message through that if there are things where resource is put up as a potential block, actually we're saying, no, we need to find the resource. And it's a conversation actually John and I also happened to have yesterday about actually in the scheme of things, whilst we work in big financial envelopes, of course, there is a lot we can do, sometimes with relatively small amounts of money in terms of the organisation. So it's something that I was really encouraging my non-executive colleagues to drive things. And yep, I take what you're saying there, Bulbinder, as well. And I think that there is an interesting piece about feeding that resourcing as well into actually the recruitment side of stuff. So actually not just giving people developments where they want it, but actually having the posts and getting people recruited into posts, not just being developed. So do you want to move on to, I don't know if that's a fresh hand, Linda, or do we need to move?
It is. I just wanted to talk to the issue of development of AHP. So that's an area that the Trust recognizes significantly, not just for ethnic minority staff. And it is one of the things that's being looked at. So I know from my conversations with Della and Suzanne, that is one of the areas that's being looked into as part of the overall development within the professional advisory group that they've set up for the AHP workforce across the organization. So again, it's something that I can take away and then bring back as an update to the network.
Okay, thank you, Linda. That's really helpful. Thank you. So I'm just going to move on to the next question then. So the BME leadership team have been made aware that recently 2 senior BME clinicians have resigned due to them feeling unfairly treated by the trust. How is the trust utilising the exit interview process to understand and learn from these types of occurrences?
Do you want to start on that one, John, or
Yeah,
take that one?
So do you want to kick off with that? I think the important thing to say at the start, that's sad news, isn't it? To be losing good staff and particularly clinical staff in current environments of professionally qualified shortages. I think my view would be that whilst that is important in the great scheme of things, that the exit interview is a relatively limited resource. I mean, there may be stuff that comes up, but I think a much richer vein would be talking to people who, before they've made that decision to leave, so that we can head things off at the pass earlier in the process, because I think that will be much more informative and help persuade them to stay. And that's not to say we haven't got an exit interview process, but I think in where there are relatively limited resources, where we target that specifically. So I wouldn't want to get too detaily and processy around exit interviews. Like I say, there can be, but I think there's other bits that are more helpful and informative for us earlier on, and in terms of the conversations that we can have with our staff.
And I think for me, I take a view that we leave organisations for different reasons, and I think separating out people who leave because they want to go to something else, that's a really positive thing. People who leave because they want to get away from the organisation is where it really concerns me. And I think if we only discover that somebody is wanting to go from us, to leave us at exit interview, then our other processes have failed. And I think we've invested quite a bit in things like freedom to speak up, and actually our value base about listening, being more open to feedback, even if it's challenging. And my ideal would be that we don't have people getting to exit interview, and that's when we discover that they're unhappy enough to be leaving us, as opposed to getting to the exit interview to say, actually, I've got this great opportunity that means that's where my next career step is, but I'm really sad to be leaving. So, and I see Angela and Robert. The next question was about about exit interviews, and I think if we just sort of take the note from there, as John said, but that we need to build exit interviews into that broader set of understanding people's experiences, because it does feel like if we've only got to that point, it's pretty much too late for us to do anything about it that's constructive.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, John. Angela. Oh, you're on mute.
I was just going to feedback that I do get that some go on to other opportunities, and people leaving shouldn't be a bad thing. But I'm conscious as co-chair over the last 6 months or so that a range of staff, clinicians, non-clinicians, have reached out to the network, and they might have had some issues at work, but they're definitely leaving because they feel sort of let down. So I've maybe had 3 or 4 conversations, and by the time they've had a conversation with me, it's too late.
Yes.
So I think that's where that probably came out as well.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on to the next question then, Angela?
Yeah, just wait. I'll skip the exit interviews one then.
Yeah, yeah, skip that one.
Due to unconscious bias, do you think that where possible that there should be at least one member of BME staff on interview panels? I think that we have actually covered that.
Yeah, we covered that one. Yeah.
So I'll go on to the next one. What is the trust doing to become more inclusive and promote anti-racism? I think we've covered that.
Yeah, we covered that one.
What steps should?
Could I just say one thing, Angela? That
Yeah.
I think I think one of the things that I think both John and I have tried to do much more deliberately is to actually talk about racism and anti-racism, and I think that that's something where yeah, that's one of the things that I've learned about, just the importance of naming racism and talking about it, and not, you know, just not diminishing it by not naming it. I think it's really important that we talk about racism. We talk about our practice around improving our anti-racist practice. I think it's important that we're using the language properly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Robert, do you want to do the next one?
Okay. So, yeah. So, what steps should someone what steps should someone working in NOTS HC who has experienced racism from patients take?
Yeah, I'll start. That is a brilliant question. So it's partly my answer is informed by my experience of working on with patients for many years and observing that happen. And it's one I referenced right at the beginning, that some of the things that come across my desk, this is something that does happen. It's still happening in the organisation, and I don't get lots. It's not frequent, but from time to time I get staff who report exactly that, and I'm sort of amalgamating a number of different incidents, but there's a similar theme that it's often people who are quite disturbed, and there's an acceptance that people who are disturbed will sometimes say things that are hurtful, but it's the response at the time and the response from the organisation to that can sometimes appear to be not interested, dismissive, to say, well, you know, what do you expect, sort of thing, and that the individual on the receiving end, you know, feels rightly that they're not supported and really upset and insulted. So hence the reason why I think it's a really good question, because the response, I think, is there's a number of things. One, we need to make sure that we really support our staff in being able to say this is happening, to support our staff, and particularly our managers and line managers, ward managers, etc., to step in and to offer support. Because I think, again, it's often can be a lack of confidence in people in knowing what to say in support of a member of staff that's been on the receiving end of that, knowing what to say, fearful of saying the wrong thing, when often the confidence say, oh, you know, that's terrible. Shall we go and have a sit down and cup of tea? How are you feeling? And talk through it and offer support. So again, partly I think it goes back to a culture and value piece in terms of what's the organisational stance for it. I think the other end of that conversation is, I think we need to be better at being really clear, just in some simple things like having posters up, you know, in our main foyers and receptions, outside wards and offices, that, you know, clearly says, you know, whatever it says in terms of, you know, no, you know, we do not tolerate this, or zero tolerance. Sherwood Forest have got some really good visible signage across their hospital, and it's very clear where they stand on it. And I think here, well, albeit there may be some variation, we don't do that well as a collective, and there'll be numerous bits in between those two examples. Paul?
I'd just add that I also want us to be developing the confidence of whole teams, so that when there are those incidents of racism, that it doesn't fall to the person on the receiving end of that to have to challenge that. They may be able to do that, but actually I want it to be able to be there to be a strength within our teams, so that anybody else would step in as well, and that ought to be a part of. Segues a bit to the next question around some of the training bit, actually, because that's about us building training across the whole of the workplace. And just absolutely acknowledging, Robert, your point about the microaggressions that can become so common that, you know, they just become what appears to be part of what is accepted, and we need to be able to challenge those too.
Thank you. Angela, do you want the next question?
Yeah. So this is not me personally, but I don't feel that the mandatory training around diversity is enough, and feel that there should be more done to promote anti-racism and allyship. Are there any plans to increase training?
My short answer is that there are. John may have some details of exactly what those are. And I think it's a really important part of what we do, and we make use of a range of tools, a range of focus, but we need to really promote and drive the training around diversity, but also particularly picking up some of these sorts of areas that we've talked about today, and actually making sure that our training offers are responding to some of these issues, and that we're also making sure that they're available and indeed sometimes being targeted, for example, at middle managers, in terms of some of the areas where we're hearing that, you know, we need to support our people better around being able to bring in some of that challenge. But I don't know, John, if you've got any more specific detail to add to that piece.
Yeah, thanks. So we've commissioned an organisation called Communities Inc., INC, to deliver a training programme for the whole trust. And just to quote one stat at you, because the training proposal is around hate crime, 67%, 2/3 of our hate crime is related to racism and related. Sorry, this might sound a bit reedy, but I couldn't remember it all without having to read off the paper. But they've sent us a proposal that has a variety of different learning sessions, hate crime focus on racism awareness, and there are 16 3-hour sessions for that. If people need the detail, I'll have to circulate it. An introduction to Stand By Me, another 8 3-hour sessions, and that's called Known Bystanders. There's also sessions looking at tackling sexual harassment, supporting tackling LGBT hostility, some cultural change makers, looking at champions training, a number of modules for that. Importantly, a number of sessions looking at supporting board development in this domain, etc. So that hopefully just gives you a flavour of something quite specific around training. We're also more broadly looking at our mandatory training that I don't think is sufficiently clear enough that we distinguish between what is mandatory and must do, as opposed to really important that you do, or that is role specific. I'm not suggesting any of this is particularly, but just to say this is in the context of a broader review of training more generally.
Just to add 2 bits in response to Natasha's question, I'm sure we can provide details of the training providers so you get a sense of who they are. And just to underscore the bit about, actually part of this is very purposeful about including board development. So in our board development time, our commitment is that we will be putting, and indeed we have done during this year already, set aside board development time to think on and be challenged on and reflect on aspects of our own work and our understanding around diversity and what we should be doing as a board. Do you want to go to the next question, Robert and Angela?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you, John. Okay, so this question, again, it's not directly from me, but I think there needs to be more BME role models or BME role models. What can be done to ensure people from the BME groups are recruited into leadership roles? I know we've talked a bit about, the NEDs, and we got some, we got Linda with us as a deputy director. So what more is being done?
I mean, for me, this ties right back to some of the stuff we've talked about in terms of our recruitment processes. But there's also, this is about the better we get our organisational cultural work and are demonstrably tackling racism, the better we are at offering career progression and then being able to deliver on that, the better we are at making sure that our processes are not inherently discriminatory and making bigger hurdles for our BME staff, then we will start to see that. I think what I did reflect on with this question as well is about how we better ensure that some of our great BME role models that we've got, and they don't have to be senior leaders either. There are some. I remember there's conversations that we've had, some of the pod chats, where actually it's not necessarily people who are in a senior leadership role, but they are still great role models. Somebody like Rushane, who had a great chat pod with me and John a while back, and I consider is a really strong role model in the organisation. I do think part of that reflection on, are we really communicating well enough about some of what we do? This is a good piece where actually I think we can build on actually really helping the visibility of some of our great role models, but that's not to go against the challenge of the question there about actually making sure that we are really tackling that recruitment. The piece about actually understanding where our significant disproportionate gaps are, and certainly in some senior bandings and senior roles, and then doing targeted work to tackle that is going to be important. John, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
Yeah, that last point, Paul, I completely agree with. I think the only other thing I'd add, and it relates to your role model piece, that a lot of the national leadership and inclusivity work that have been done by a guru called Michael West, that some of you may have come across, and he talks about something called distributed leadership. He's not the only one that talks about it, but I remember him listening to talk once, and he had a really good definition of what that meant, and which stuck with me, and that's about having people who are both confident and competent in their role wherever they are across an organization. And if you organizationally you can support that to happen, then do you know what, you've got some really strong leaders, not in appointed leadership hierarchical roles, but doing that leadership right down to sort of micro local team levels. And again, that's something that I'm really important to pursue here. And we don't tend not to hear about distributed leadership quite so much, but at the moment, but these things get called other as we move forward and sort of come and go a bit. But particularly in terms of thinking as we develop the system across the council, the ICS, that distributed leadership will be a really important piece for us, and that's something within this context that I think we really need to focus on. Thanks.
Thank you, Angela.
I was just going to say, link back to recruitment in terms of, I know we're constrained by NHS jobs, but I think we could pay more attention to getting our values across in our adverts. I know you get a bit of a bog standard template that you do, but as a response to receiving training in that, I did look back at my previous role about getting the change of the values and getting those in right from the start, from when you're interviewing. And I know sometimes our job descriptions, I know because of evaluation, but a lot of the time they focus on skills, and the fact that you've shortlisted somebody is fair enough, but what you actually want to know is what their values are like and how they tick as a person and how they are going to work with patient service users or whatever, rather than focus on technical skills, because you can train those, and but it's harder to train somebody who's got the right attitude and values.
Thank you. Over to my role model, Balvinder.
Just to apologise for going back to the evidence and being tedious about that. But one of the things that I think is really evident from all the evidence about race and racism and those issues is that compassion turns out to be a really key component in the process of self and other relationships, in reducing racism and sexism and all the isms. I think there is some mileage in really locking all this in to the core ideas around compassion that we've got already. And if we do that in a way that's based on the evidence and thought through, I think what we might be able to do is work on all the issues in a way that turns out to be much more productive, and can then shift the bigger culture without, I'm trying to think about the right way of phrasing this, but without creating resentment in others. You know, so you instead of being divisive in your thinking, you become much more inclusive. And in that way, you can deal with issues around racism and sexism, but through a thinking around compassion, which the evidence is really suggesting is the key emotional state that enables a relationship to enhance and get closer. And that's what we're looking for in our colleagues and our clinical work. So I just wanted to add that to what Angela was saying. Values, I think, is probably the key thing in the way we recruit and bring people into the organisation.
Thank you, Balvinder. Angela, do you want to go on to the last question?
Oh, go on then. I've still got my... Right then, finally, how do you think that the trade unions staff side can support members of the network? And I'm going to hold my hand up and say this is my question, because it's actually become a big thing. Because sometimes the network, we're supportive, you know, we're a support mechanism, but we're not skilled in representing staff. So we can sort of offer support and stuff, but there's a bit of a, so I attended an event and there's a disconnect between staff side trade unions and the network. So I think sometimes the network get disillusioned with us, because if a network member comes to me as co-chair, all I will say is, have you spoke to your line manager? Have you got the support of your colleagues? Have you thought about freedom to speak up? Finding out if there's any HR issues, but I can't, somebody might ask me, oh, I've got a meeting, would you mind supporting me? But then there's also not the confidence for BME staff, which has been going as long as I've been in the public sector, around having the confidence of staff side to support BME members. So I just feel that as a network, we could work more closely with staff side.
I've not got much of an answer to that, Angela.
Yeah.
My only thought on it is, and is just to be reflecting on, for me, the value that we've had for John and myself having real conversations. And I wonder whether we can enable a parallel kind of conversation with staff side. I know, obviously, for John and myself, we have to take care on how we might do that. But something, if there's encouragement and support, so perhaps that's one that we need to take away and just try and think about how can we potentially enable that, because I think what you've described there, for me, trade unions staff side, it's a really, really important, valuable resource and should be there for any member of staff who chooses to seek it. And if the experience is that for some of our staff that's not working, then that doesn't feel right to me. John, I don't know if there's anything more specific you could add.
Not very much more really than what you and Angela has articulated. I think it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think it is a really good question. I think we are currently relatively restricted because of the relatively small number of trade union support people that we have, and if we don't have that in a way that's currently working, there's not necessarily an option to get a BME staff side seat, and for whatever the technical reasons are, then we need to find other ways to move it forward, because it's a really important question. And perhaps you're right, Paul, that perhaps a good place to start would be to have a similar select conversation with some of us that are on the call today with staff side, because I'm sure they'd be equally keen to support all our staff and take feedback and review their offer, and that might be the best way forward, to get all parties on a virtual call just to explore it a bit.
Yeah, and just to say, whilst that whoever makes sense to bring into that space, if that's something that John and myself can helpfully contribute to, we'd be very up for doing that. It may be that doesn't help, but just to put that out there. So look at that, 5 minutes to go. So we've actually beaten the target there, Robert and Angela.
No, thank you very much.
That's a first for me.
No, it's been a really good conversation. I think I don't think we've rushed through the questions. I think we've managed them really well at a really good pace. So is there an opportunity, just going out to the wider network, is any questions, possibly one question we can ask Paul and John, just to put them on the spot? Any offers?
If there's not a question, whilst people have gone,
Bulbin.
I've got one, John. John, would you like to join our Race, Religions, Beliefs, Equality Steering Group and offer your change name as your representative from the board?
Yes, but I wouldn't. I don't think I could commit specifically to vast amounts of time. I know everybody's very busy, but I wouldn't want to commit to something that I wouldn't be able to fulfill, Bulbinder.
Okay, I think we'd welcome you anyhow. That's what I'm trying to say. Whatever time you could commit.
So, Angela.
I'm going to put you on the spot now. I think I might know the answer because you might be working on it, but have we got a new senior board champion?
Oh, yeah.
In terms of
the BME Staff Network?
In terms of the exec side, well, from the non-exec side, what the conversation that I've been having with our non-execs is that Sue Nixon has taken on the mantle of as an equalities lead, which means that she is being targeted for really championing and making sure that we're talking about equalities within committee and in board. I don't know, John, who the exec lead is.
No, I saw Catherine come up on screen there, was about to inform me of whether it was no or who it was.
I'm waiting in your decision. I've given you two names. And
I
I've
thought
changed
that
it.
might, I thought that might come back to me.
Let me know if you don't get an answer, Catherine. I'll pick it up. I'll pick it up in one-to-ones.
Apologies.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, John.
Right, so we've got a couple of minutes left. Just to thank you again, Paul and John. I think it's been a really healthy conversation. It's really good that we have an opportunity as a network to be able to have your time. We know your time is precious. So any last words from you, Angela?
No, I think I've done enough damage.
So as Catherine said on the chat there, there's, you've literally got 2 minutes. Any last, any last chance to ask a question or just to make a comment from anybody?
Just what I would say
Yeah.
to anybody who's not spoken, my email and John's email are on the system. So if there is anything that you're thinking or you think afterwards, oh, I wish I'd asked this, please do use that as well as the routes through the network. We do try and be as responsive as we can be.
Thank you. Thank you for that offer.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Thanks
Thank you.
very much for the
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a
you,
good
everybody.
have a good weekend.
Good weekend, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks
Take care.
a lot.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.